Coming live from the Tivoli Met Radio studio here on the Auraria campus, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for listening to All Sports through Met Radio on mymetmedia.com, live every Thursday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. This is your host Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, NHL hockey, and college football. Before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. Happy Halloween. To start off, at the middle every month, I post a video or talk about one stadium I went to. So stay tuned for future videos from stadiums across the US. For the month of October, I posted a video where I talked about Fenway Park and my experience there. You can go watch that video on YouTube. You can also view videos from the past and subscribe to my YouTube page at All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to Major League Baseball, Mike Medini will become the next manager of the Royals. The 2019 Major League Baseball season has officially ended. Now that the World Series has come to an end, the World Series was between the Astros and the Nationals. The Nationals are the 2019 World Series champions. Congrats to the Nationals on winning their first World Series title in franchise history. This is the Nationals' first World Series title. They've only been around since 2005. The Nationals used to be the Montreal Expos, and then they relocated to Washington, D.C. from Montreal in 2005, and they became the Washington Nationals. Before Washington, D.C. used to have baseball, it used to be the Washington Senators, but then they left. And then for many years, Washington, D.C. didn't have baseball until the Washington Nationals came to Washington, D.C. But now that Washington, D.C. finally has baseball, they have finally been able to witness the Nationals win their first World Series championship. And they're hoping the Nationals can win many more World Series championships going into the future, and even next year since they just won the World Series. Steven Strasburg was named World Series MVP after going 5-0 during the postseason. The Nationals became the 7th wildcard team to win the World Series. Throughout the postseason, the Nationals trailed in 5 elimination games, and they were able to win all 5 games. This is the first time in postseason history the Nationals were able to win 3 winner-take-all games. This is the first time in Major League Baseball history the visiting team won all 4 of the road games in a single Major League Baseball postseason series, and they won the World Series by only winning all of the road games. During this year's World Series, the Nationals and Astros didn't win their home games, but they won the games on the road at the opposing team's stadium. This is the first time in Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL playoff history that the road team won all the road games in a playoff series. The World Series was the first time this season the Astros lost 4 straight home games. Both the Nationals and the Astros were not able to win their home games in their home stadiums. But when both teams went on the road to play at the opposing team's stadium, they were able to win the games on the road. And with the World Series having to go back to Houston for Game 6 and Game 7, there's no doubt the Nationals had the edge of winning the World Series since they were the road team. In Game 1 and Game 2, the Nationals were able to win both games down in Houston. So with the Nationals having a 2-0 lead and going back to Washington, D.C. for the next 3 games, there's no doubt that the Nationals would either sweep the Astros, which wasn't that likely, or only lose one game in Washington, D.C. and still have a chance at winning the World Series in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, the Astros went to Washington, D.C. and won the next 3 games, and the Nationals were not able to win in Washington, D.C. So to put the icing on the cake, for Game 6 and Game 7, both games were down in Houston. So the Nationals went to Houston, and they won Game 6 and Game 7, since they were the road team, and they were in Houston. So that was definitely the icing on the cake for the Nationals. Since they were the road team, they went down to Houston after losing all 3 home games in Washington, D.C., with the Astros having a 3-2 lead over the Nationals and winning the next 3 games. There was no doubt that the Astros were going to be able to go down to Houston and just win one more game and win the World Series and be World Series champions. But the Nationals had other plans. They went down to Houston and they won Game 6 and Game 7, and that's why they're the 2019 World Series champions. But for the Nationals and the Astros, their road to the World Series wasn't that easy, especially for the Nationals. With the Nationals starting the season 19-31 and having a 19-31 record on May 24th, they were 12 games under 500. They were only 1.5 games ahead of the last place Marlins in the National League East. The Nationals had a .380 winning percentage. So who would have thought the Nationals would have made it into the postseason? Even before and once the season started for the Nationals were not favored to win the World Series or even make it into the playoffs. The people that make the predictions for the teams that will make it into the playoffs, the teams that have the potential of reaching the World Series and winning the World Series, them, including myself, fans, and many other people across Major League Baseball and in the sports world, but especially the Nationals fans, they would have never favored the Nationals to make it to the World Series and win the World Series. And who would have thought the Nationals would have made it into the postseason, especially after losing Bryce Harper in free agency? But the Nationals still had a young, talented roster. They still had starting pitchers, they still had relievers in the bullpen, and they still had a great starting lineup. So even though the Nationals' chances of even making it into the playoffs were slim, they still had a decent roster, and they still went after key players to make their team better after Bryce Harper left during free agency. And since the Nationals didn't have Bryce Harper and they had money they could spend, they went after key players they needed to make their roster better. But after they started off the first 2 months of the regular season the way they did, many of the big name players on the Nationals wanted to be traded, since the Nationals were not going to have a great season. And even manager Dave Martinez was on the hot seat. Even though many players on the Nationals wanted to be traded, which included their big name players that were starting pitchers mainly, and even players in their starting lineup, the Nationals kept their roster together, and they even added players along the way. They made moves during the offseason and even during the season. They improved their team so they could get back to their winning ways and have a better roster. And there's no doubt they did that. And since this team stuck together and they added the missing pieces they needed on this team, after May, the Nationals started turning their season around. And they had a better season all the way to the end of the regular season. Even though the home games at Nationals Park were not getting sold out and they weren't getting big attendance crowds, the Nationals were trying to play better baseball. And there's no doubt they started playing better baseball going into the summer and all the way to the end of the regular season. But especially in the last 2 months of the regular season, especially in the last few weeks of the regular season in September, they went on a winning streak, which led them into the postseason after winning 93 games during the regular season, which led them to clinching the first wildcard spot in the National League. So the Nationals made it into the playoffs. They beat other great teams along the way in the National League throughout the postseason. This included the Brewers in the wild card game, the Dodgers in the division series, and the Cardinals in the championship series. The Nationals reached the World Series, and they ended up beating the Astros in the World Series. And they took the Astros all the way to Game 7 of the World Series. Since 2012, the luck hasn't always been on the Nationals' side. For those 6 years, there were seasons that the Nationals were making it into the playoffs, but there was also many times the Nationals were getting upset in the postseason, mainly in the division series, also in wild card games, the division series, the championship series. But in 2019, it looks like things changed for the Nationals. The luck was on the Nationals' side throughout the postseason, all the way up until the World Series against the Astros. Throughout the postseason, the Nationals fought in every game throughout the postseason, in every series throughout the postseason. And the Nationals landed up winning the World Series this year. The Nationals are your 2019 World Series champions, and there's no doubt the Nationals made history this season by reaching and winning the World Series for the first time in franchise history. For the Nationals, Ryan Zimmerman is their franchise player, and he's Mr. National. Ryan Zimmerman was the first draft pick in Nationals history in the 2005 Major League Baseball draft. He hit a walk-off home run in the first game at Nationals Park back in 2008. He hit the first postseason home run in Nationals history during Game 2 of the 2012 National League Division Series, and he hit the first World Series home run in Nationals history during Game 1 of the 2019 World Series. So there's no doubt that Ryan Zimmerman is their franchise player, and he's also one of the best players to ever play for the Nationals. Even though the Nationals don't have that much history, and they've only been around for 15 years, since 2005. For the Astros, they had a great season, even though they didn't end up winning the 2019 World Series. They were very close. They went against the Nationals and went all the way to Game 7, but the World Series slid out of their hands late in Game 7 of the World Series. So it's unfortunate for the Astros. They could have won the World Series. They were that close. If the Astros would have won the World Series, this would have been their second World Series championship in the last 3 years. The Astros won the 2017 World Series. They could have won the 2019 World Series. There's no doubt they will be a contender for the 2020 World Series. But for the Astros, after winning 107 regular season games and they reached the World Series, even though they couldn't beat the Nationals in the World Series, they still had a great season, and there's no doubt that the Astros also made history in 2019. The Astros will likely produce the MVP, Alex Bregman, for the American League, the Cy Young Award winner, Garrett Cole, for the American League, and the Rookie of the Year, Yordan Alvarez, for the American League. And we're just going to have to wait and see if these individual players win these awards in the American League, but there's no doubt all these individual players are contenders for those individual awards in the American League. Now, looking at the postseason bracket for the Nationals and the Astros, here is the road for the Nationals and the Astros to get to the 2019 World Series. Now, looking at the Nationals, they were a wild card team in the National League. They landed up beating the Brewers in the National League wild card game. In the National League Division Series, the Nationals played the Dodgers. The Dodgers were the best team in the National League, and they were also one of the best teams in Major League Baseball this season. The Nationals took the Dodgers all the way to Game 5, and the Nationals landed up upsetting the Dodgers in Game 5 of the National League Division Series at Dodger Stadium. So the Nationals advanced to the National League Championship Series. They went against the Cardinals. They swept the Cardinals, and then the Nationals made it to the World Series. Now, looking at the Astros, they won the American League West. They went in as a division champion. In the American League Division Series, the Astros landed up going against the Rays. And the Rays took the Astros all the way to Game 5 of the American League Division Series. And the Astros were able to hold on, and they were able to beat the Rays in Game 5 of the Division Series. And the Astros landed up moving on to the American League Championship Series. In the American League Championship Series, the Astros went against the Yankees, and this was a great series. It went all the way to Game 6, and the Astros landed up holding on and winning this series 4-2, and then the Astros made it into the World Series. In this year's World Series, we had the Nationals going against the Astros. The Nationals were a wild card team in the National League, and the Astros won the American League West, and they were a division champion. So we had the Nationals going against the Astros in this year's World Series. And this World Series went all the way to Game 7. The Nationals showed that they were the better team, and they were able to hold on, and they were able to beat the Astros in the 2019 World Series in Game 7 down in Houston. There's no doubt that the 2019 World Series was a great World Series. And the highlight of this year's World Series was the road team was able to win on the road at the opposing team's stadium. And the home team, they couldn't win their home games. So with the World Series starting in Houston, this gave the Nationals the advantage since they had 4 road games. And that's one of the reasons as to why the Nationals were able to win this year's World Series. Now, looking at the World Series from Game 1 all the way to Game 7, there's no doubt the Astros had the better record since they won over 100 games. They finished off the season winning 107 games, and the Nationals finished off the season winning 93 games. After the Astros won 107 games during the regular season and the Nationals won 93 games during the regular season, the Astros were definitely going to have the home field advantage during the World Series since they had the better record. Game 1 and Game 2 were down in Houston. In Game 1, the Nationals won a close game 5-4. In Game 2, the Nationals blew out the Astros and they won the game 12-3. Game 3, Game 4, and Game 5 were up in Washington, D.C. In Game 3, the Astros won the game 4-1. In Game 4, the Astros won the game 8-1. And in Game 5, the Astros won the game 7-1. So the Astros landed up blowing out the Nationals in all 3 games up in Washington, D.C. Game 6 and Game 7 were down in Houston. In Game 6, the Nationals won the game 7-2. And in Game 7, the Nationals won the game 6-2. So the Nationals landed up winning this year's World Series in Game 7 down in Houston. There's no doubt that the Nationals played better baseball on the road. They were able to blow out the Astros and play better baseball on the road down in Houston. Up in Washington, D.C., the Nationals got blown out by the Astros in all 3 home games, and the Nationals were not able to win a home game up in Washington, D.C. at Nationals Park. So the only way the Nationals were able to win this year's World Series was by going on the road down to Houston and winning all of the road games, which they ended up doing, and that's why they're World Series champions. Now looking at the Nationals and the Astros individually, to start off with the Nationals, this is one of the main reasons as to why the Nationals won the World Series. Juan Soto had a great World Series. He was able to hit a lot of home runs. Max Scherzer pitched great throughout the World Series, and they really needed Max Scherzer to pitch great, especially in Game 7, which he landed up doing, and that's why the Nationals won this year's World Series. Anthony Rendon had a great World Series. He was hitting home runs. He was very productive for the Nationals. Steven Strasburg pitched great throughout the postseason, but especially in the World Series. That's why the Nationals won the World Series, because of Steven Strasburg pitching great and winning games, especially in the World Series. He was also the World Series MVP. Ryan Zimmerman continued making history for the Nationals since he's Mr. National and he's their franchise player. Ryan Zimmerman continued making history for the Nationals throughout the postseason and in the World Series. Kirk Suzuki was a great catcher for the Nationals. Patrick Corbin was a great pitcher for the Nationals, especially in the World Series and in Game 7. Howie Kendrick is also one of the other reasons as to why the Nationals were able to win this year's World Series. When they needed big hits, Howie Kendrick was making those big hits throughout the entire postseason, especially in the World Series, but especially throughout the entire postseason. Especially in elimination games, Howie Kendrick was doing that big hit, and that's why the Nationals were able to win games throughout the postseason and advance into the next round of the postseason, reach the World Series, and win the World Series. And the rest of the Nationals roster, they all contributed in a special way. So that's why the Nationals were able to win games throughout the postseason, win the elimination games, advance into the next round of the postseason, reach the World Series, and win the World Series. The Nationals needed every player on their team to be productive, and that's why they were able to reach the World Series and win the World Series, and they were able to win games throughout the postseason and advance into the next round of the postseason, which led them to getting to the World Series and winning the World Series. For the Astros, even though they didn't land up winning the World Series and it slid out of their hand in Game 7, every player on the Astros roster contributed in a special way. Jose Altuve definitely contributed in many ways throughout the postseason. And he was one of the main reasons as to why the Astros made it to the World Series after having that big walk-off home run in the American League Championship Series against the Yankees down in Houston. He is one of the main reasons as to why the Astros were in the World Series. Gerrit Cole, Zach Greinke pitched great throughout the regular season, especially in the postseason and in the World Series. That was also one of the other reasons as to why the Astros were in the World Series. There's no doubt that Gerrit Cole should win the American League Cy Young, and he's definitely a serious contender to win the Cy Young in the American League. Justin Verlander pitched great throughout the regular season, even though he didn't pitch great in the postseason, especially in the World Series. He still contributed in a great way. It's unfortunate that Justin Verlander didn't pitch that great in the World Series, especially. He joins Clayton Kershaw and other great starting pitchers in Major League Baseball as the only pitchers to pitch great throughout the regular season, but when it comes down to the postseason, they just don't pitch great, and they're not the pitcher that we know throughout the regular season. They're different in the postseason, and Justin Verlander has not been able to win a World Series game throughout his entire career, and he has started a few games in the World Series, but he has not been able to win a single World Series start. Alex Bregman contributed in a great way for the Astros throughout the postseason, especially in the World Series. That was another reason as to why the Astros were in the World Series. There's no doubt that Alex Bregman is a serious contender to win MVP for the American League this year. George Springer was also a serious contributor for the Astros, especially in the postseason, and with all the home runs he was able to hit in this year's World Series. Carlos Correa was a huge contributor for the Astros throughout the entire postseason. Yordan Alvarez was also a serious contributor for the Astros throughout the postseason. There's no doubt he should be Rookie of the Year for the American League. Also, the rest of the Astros roster, all these individual players contributed in many different ways. And that is also one of the reasons why the Astros were able to reach the World Series. Even though they didn't land up winning the World Series, that's why the Astros were able to win games throughout the postseason and reach the World Series this year. And there's no doubt the Astros will be a World Series contender for 2020. Now that the 2019 baseball season has come to an end and we now have a World Series champion, we are now turning the page to the off season, and we gotta wait and see what individual players win what awards in the American League and in the National League. But it's going to be interesting to see what individual players win what individual awards in both the American League and the National League. The winners of those awards in the American League and in the National League will be coming up in the next few weeks. But we also have to look forward to free agency in Major League Baseball coming up this winter. It's going to be interesting to see what players hit the free agency market and what individual players sign with new Major League Baseball team. Free agency this winter for Major League Baseball is definitely going to be interesting. We're going to have to wait and see what individual players hit the free agency market. That's definitely going to be interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see these individual players and what team these individual players will sign with. After the Nationals won the World Series and after the Astros reached the World Series, both teams will have potential free agents. And we're going to have to wait and see who those free agents are. But if certain individual players from the Nationals and the Astros will end up walking into free agency, it's going to be interesting to see what team they sign with. During free agency this winter, you definitely need to keep an eye on Gerrit Cole, especially, and other players that will end up hitting free agency from the Nationals and from the Astros this winter, but also the other free agents that are going to hit free agency this winter across Major League Baseball. And it's going to be interesting to see where these individual players sign and what team they'll end up going to this winter. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the NFL. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to NFL football. Bill Belichick now has 300 career wins in the NFL as a head coach. The wins include the regular season and the playoffs. Bill Belichick's first win as a head coach was with the Browns in 1991, and it was against the Patriots. And his 300 win as a head coach with the Patriots in 2019 was against the Browns. So looking at Bill Belichick's career as a head coach in the NFL, there's no doubt that he's one of the best head coaches to ever coach in the NFL. And we're going to have to wait and see when he decides to retire. He hasn't made the decision if he wants to keep coaching into his 70s or when he's going to retire. It's going to be interesting to see when Tom Brady retires from the NFL, which looks like that's not going to happen anytime soon. But when he does, it's going to be interesting to see if that's the time when Bill Belichick will also retire, or if he's going to keep coaching for the Patriots or in the NFL. But there's no doubt once Bill Belichick retires from the NFL that he's one of the best head coaches to ever coach in the NFL, and there's no doubt he will be a Hall of Famer in the future. Drew Brees is the first quarterback in NFL history to reach 75,000 career passing yards. So there's no doubt that Drew Brees is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play in the NFL. And in 2019, just like he has in the last few years, he's continuing to make history. And there's no doubt once Drew Brees retires from the NFL that he will be a Hall of Famer. Adrian Peterson moved into 6th on the all-time career rushing yards list. DeAndre Hopkins is now the 3rd youngest player in NFL history to reach 8,000 career receiving yards. Juju Smith-Schuster passed Randy Moss for the most 100-yard receiving games in NFL history before turning 23 years old. Last week, after Joey Bosa had 2 sacks and 4 tackles for a loss, Nick Bosa had 3 sacks and 1 interception. Joey Bosa was named Week 8 AFC Defensive Player of the Week, and Nick Bosa was named Week 8 NFC Defensive Player of the Week. This is the first time in NFL history 2 brothers, the Bosa brothers, were named Defensive Player of the Week in the same week for both conferences. J.J. Watt announced on Twitter he is out for the rest of the season after tearing his pectoral muscle, and he was placed on injured reserve. There's no doubt that J.J. Watt is one of the best defensive players in the NFL. But unfortunately, J.J. Watt has a long list of injuries in the last few years, which has sidelined J.J. Watt for most of the season or for the entire season. So it's unfortunate that J.J. Watt has a history of getting injured and missing significant time for the Texans, which includes most of the season or the entire season. But there's no doubt when J.J. Watt is on the field for the Texans, he's one of the best defensive players for the Texans and in the NFL. So the Texans definitely miss J.J. Watt when he's not on the field, and they're definitely going to miss him for the rest of the season. Even though J.J. Watt is our franchise player and one of their best players on the Texans, there's no doubt that the Texans will miss J.J. Watt. But now, the Texans don't only have J.J. Watt to hold on to the ship. Now they got Deshaun Watson and other individual players on the Texans that can hold on to the ship and control the team. And they can hold on to the team as J.J. Watt misses significant time or the rest of the season. So the Texans don't have to worry about J.J. Watt missing significant time and not having one of their best players or a franchise player hold on to the team for the rest of the season. So the Texans will definitely miss J.J. Watt, but now they have other individual players that can hold on to the team and keep the team together for the rest of the season as they're trying to have a great season, reach the playoffs, make the playoffs, and advance far in the playoffs. The Chargers fired offensive coordinator Ken Wilsenhurt. The Falcons released kicker Matt Bryant, and they signed kicker Young-Ho Koo. The NFL trade deadline was on Tuesday, October 29. So up until the NFL trade deadline, there were a lot of trades that happened across the NFL. And for the Broncos, they landed up trading Emmanuel Sanders, but they landed up not trading Chris Harris, even though teams threw offers to the Broncos so they could trade for Chris Harris. The Broncos landed up not trading Chris Harris since the offers were not good enough. And they were demanding really good draft picks, or they were demanding something good in return to trade Chris Harris. The Broncos were not going to just let Chris Harris go that easy. So the Broncos landed up keeping Chris Harris on the team. So here are all the trades that happened up until the trade deadline, and there were also many other trades that happened in the last few weeks, all the way up to the trade deadline. But here are the current trades that happened up until the trade deadline. The Rams traded Aqib Talib and a 5th-round pick to the Dolphins in exchange for a future draft pick. The Patriots traded Michael Bennett to the Cowboys in exchange for a conditional 7th-round pick in 2021. The Dolphins traded running back Kenyon Drake to the Cardinals in exchange for a conditional 2020 draft pick. The Browns traded defensive end Gerald Avery to the Eagles in exchange for a 4th-round draft pick in 2021. The Jets traded defensive lineman Leonard Williams to the Giants in exchange for a 3rd and 5th-round pick. Broncos head coach Vic Fangio announced Joe Flacco will not play in the Broncos-Browns game this week due to a herniated disc in his neck. Brandon Allen will start this week for the Broncos, and this will be his first career start in the NFL. Now looking at Joe Flacco, this neck injury that Joe Flacco suffered during the Broncos-Colts game, this looks like this ain't something that Joe Flacco is going to recover from in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, or anytime soon. This injury looks like Joe Flacco will not be able to recover in the next game or in time for the next game that the Broncos play. Even though the Broncos play against the Browns this week and they have their bye week the following week before they return back in 2 weeks, doesn't look like Joe Flacco can recover in 2 weeks before the Broncos return back from their bye week. So looking at the Joe Flacco situation, it looks like the Broncos are going to put Joe Flacco on injured reserve for the next few weeks. It's looking like Joe Flacco could miss the next 4 to 6 weeks, which would put Joe Flacco on injured reserve. There's a possibility he is done for the rest of the season, but there's even a possibility the Broncos-Colts game was the last game Joe Flacco played for the Broncos. We're going to have to wait and see if Joe Flacco returns this season or even if Joe Flacco plays another game for the Broncos. But that's down the road. That's a different conversation I don't want to get into right now. But in 2020, the Broncos could definitely have a different starting quarterback on their roster, starting for their team. Now looking at the Broncos quarterback situation, the Broncos got Brandon Allen starting this week against the Browns. This will be his first career start. We're going to have to wait and see how Brandon Allen plays at the quarterback position for the Broncos and if the Broncos can beat the Browns here at Mile High Stadium in Denver. Also, Drew Lock is on injured reserve. We're going to have to wait and see if Drew Lock comes off of injured reserve. It's looking like that's going to happen after their bye week. Also, with the Broncos having a 2-6 record, we're going to have to wait and see. But do the Broncos throw in Drew Lock down the road towards the end of the regular season, sometime in December, and see what Drew Lock is capable of and if he can be their franchise quarterback going into the future, since he's a rookie quarterback that they just drafted this year? We're going to have to wait and see. But with the Broncos having a 2-6 record, and it's looking like their season's done and they're not going to make it into the playoffs, the Broncos are definitely going to try to explore their other quarterbacks and see what they're capable of and if they can win games for the Broncos for the rest of the season. So expect Drew Lock to start for the Broncos in one of the games going down the road sometime towards the end of the regular season. The Broncos lost to the Colts 13-15 on Sunday, October 27. Now looking at the Broncos, the 2 field goals that they kicked that should have been touchdowns, that basically determined the Broncos from winning this game and beating the Colts up in Indianapolis. Now looking at the Broncos on offense, they're able to score enough points to beat the Colts, but they were not able to score touchdowns. They were only able to score field goals, and that basically determined the Broncos from winning this game. As we saw the last minute of the game play out against the Colts, If they would have scored touchdowns instead of field goals, the Broncos would have likely won this game against the Colts. Now looking at the Broncos on defense, they didn't play that bad on defense. They played really great on defense, but it was the Broncos offense that could not win the game for the Broncos this week. Now looking at the Colts on offense and defense, they were able to do enough to beat the Broncos in a close game. And even though quarterback Jacoby Brissett didn't have his best game, the Colts offense and the defense were able to do enough to beat the Broncos in a close game. Even though the Colts kicker missed a field goal and an extra point, when he needed to win the game for the Colts and have that game-winning field goal, he was able to make that field goal, which ended up winning the game for the Colts. So it would have been nice to see the Broncos knock off the Colts and beat the Colts up in Indianapolis, especially with the way the Colts have started off the season with quarterback Jacoby Brissett and the Colts. And they were that close, but the game slid out of their hand in the last minute. And the Broncos have lost 3 games this season by a field goal. In those 3 games, they should have won. They should have won the game against the Bears and the Jaguars here in Denver, but they ended up losing both of those games by a field goal. And up in Indianapolis, the Broncos ended up letting this game slide out of their hand at the very end, just like they did against the Bears and the Jaguars. And with the Broncos letting those 3 games slide out of their hand at the very end by a game-winning field goal, that's one of the reasons as to why the Broncos are 2-6. But if the Broncos were able to win those 3 games against the Bears, Jaguars, and the Colts, they would have a different record right now. And we would have won 5 games this season. Our record should be 5-3 right now, and we should be competing for the AFC West with the Chiefs. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. The Broncos are currently 2-6, and it looks like it's going to be another losing season for the Broncos in 2019. And we're going to have to wait and see how the rest of the season plays out for the Broncos. The Broncos' next game is against the Browns on Sunday, November 3rd in Denver. Now looking at the Broncos, they're going to have to play great on offense, not score field goals, but score touchdowns if they want to win this game. And we're going to have to wait and see how quarterback Brandon Allen plays, and if Brandon Allen can win a game for the Broncos against the Browns. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Broncos play on offense now that they have Brandon Allen at quarterback, and this will be his first career start. The Broncos are going to have to play great on defense. They're going to have to stop Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham, and the rest of the Browns' offense from scoring points and a lot of touchdowns. The Broncos are definitely going to have to stop Baker Mayfield from making a lot of big plays with Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, but they also cannot let Nick Chubb have a big game. If they let running back Nick Chubb have a big game like he did last season against the Broncos here in Denver, the Broncos are not winning this game. And for the Browns, if they play great defense, especially if Myles Garrett has a big game for the Browns on defense, the Broncos are not beating the Browns. So those are the keys for the Broncos on beating the Browns this weekend here in Denver. And whatever team plays better football and whatever individual players on whatever team has a big game for their team, that's going to be the team that wins this game this weekend. This is a 9-week of regular season football. So right now I'm going to update you with the Week 8 final scores. I'm also going to tell you the Week 9 schedule and the games to keep an eye on this week in the NFL. Now looking at the NFL schedule, here are the Week 8 final scores and highlights from this week of NFL football. The Vikings beat the Redskins 19-9 on Thursday Night Football. The Seahawks beat the Falcons 27-20. The Colts beat the Broncos 15-13. The Titans beat the Buccaneers 27-23. The Eagles beat the Bills 31-13. The Chargers beat the Bears 17-16. The Lions beat the Giants 31-26. The 49ers beat the Panthers 51-13. The Texans beat the Raiders 27-24. The Patriots beat the Browns 27-13. The Packers beat the Chiefs 31-24 on Sunday Night Football, and the Steelers beat the Dolphins 27-14 on Monday Night Football. Now looking at the Week 9 matchups, here are the Week 9 matchups to keep an eye on this week in NFL football. The 49ers versus the Cardinals on Thursday Night Football. The Texans versus the Jaguars. The Bears versus the Eagles. The Vikings versus the Chiefs. The Lions versus the Raiders. The Packers versus the Chargers. The Browns versus the Broncos. The Patriots versus the Ravens on Sunday Night Football. And the Cowboys versus the Giants on Monday Night Football. So that's the Week 8 final scores and the Week 9 schedule for the NFL. The Cardinals, Falcons, Bills, Panthers, Bengals, Browns, Lions, Texans, Jaguars, Chargers, Vikings, and Titans have never won a Super Bowl. The undefeated teams so far this season includes the Patriots and 49ers. We're going to have to wait and see how many more games the Patriots and 49ers remain undefeated, or if both teams can remain undefeated for the entire season. In the Week 9 NFL Power Rankings, the current top 10 NFL football teams are the Patriots, 49ers, Saints, Packers, Chiefs, Ravens, Seahawks, Vikings, Texans, and Rams. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the NBA and NHL. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to NBA basketball. Spurs head coach Greg Popovich moved into first for most seasons coached with one franchise. Vince Carter moved into first for most seasons played in NBA history. 4 players have played 21 seasons in the NBA, which was the most seasons played in the NBA. But Vince Carter broke that record since he has now played 22 seasons in the NBA, which is the most seasons played in the NBA. So congrats to Vince Carter on breaking history this season in the NBA and for continuing to make history in the NBA. There's no doubt that Vince Carter is one of the best players to ever play in the NBA. Vince Carter's 22nd season in the NBA is very likely going to be his last season in the NBA. Many people are expecting Vince Carter to retire at the end of this season. And once he retires from the NBA, there's no doubt that Vince Carter was one of the best players to ever play in the NBA. And in the future, he may see himself in the NBA Hall of Fame. We're going to have to wait and see if Vince Carter gets into the NBA Hall of Fame. But I want to say congrats to Vince Carter on continuing to make history in the NBA and for having a great career in the NBA. So good luck to Vince Carter in his 22nd season in the NBA and continue making history in the NBA. Russell Westbrook passed Magic Johnson to move into second in most triple-doubles. Only Oscar Robertson is in front of Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook moved into 20th in all-time assists. So right now I'm going to update you with the current Nuggets schedule. I'm going to tell you the final scores and the teams they went against in the last week. And I'm also going to tell you the teams the Nuggets go against in the next week. So to start off, last week, the Nuggets went against the Suns in their home opener here at the Pepsi Center. And the Nuggets were able to beat the Suns in a close game in overtime, 108-107. The Nuggets were able to beat the Kings, 101-94. And unfortunately, the Nuggets lost a close game to the Mavericks, 106-109. This week, the Nuggets go against the Pelicans, the Magic, and the Heat. So that's the current Nuggets schedule for the teams the Nuggets went against in the last week and for the teams they go against in the next week. In the Week 2 NBA Power Rankings, the current top 10 NBA basketball teams are the Clippers, 76ers, Bucks, Nuggets, Lakers, Rockets, Jazz, Celtics, Spurs, and Trailblazers. Moving on now to NHL hockey. Right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Avalanche. I'm going to tell you the teams they went against in the last week. And I'm also going to tell you the teams they go against in the next week. So to start off, last week the Avalanche went against the Golden Knights. And the Avalanche ended up winning this game 6-1. The Avalanche went against the Ducks. And they ended up losing that game 5-2. And the Avalanche went against the Panthers, but they lost a close game to the Panthers in overtime, 3-4. This week, the Avalanche go against the Stars twice, down in Dallas and here in Denver. And the Avalanche also go against the Coyotes and the Predators. So that's the current schedule for the Avalanche, for the teams they went against in the last week and for the teams they go against in the next week. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about college football. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to college football. Colorado lost to USC 31-35 on Friday, October 25th up in Boulder, Colorado. Colorado State beat Fresno State 41-31 on Saturday, October 26th. Colorado goes against UCLA on Saturday, November 2nd. Colorado State goes against UNLV on Saturday, November 2nd up in Fort Collins, Colorado. This is the 10th week of college football. So right now I'm going to update you with the Week 9 college football final scores. I'm also going to tell you the Week 10 college football schedule and the games to keep an eye on this week in college football. So looking at the college football schedule, here are the Week 9 final scores and highlights from this week of college football. Number 3, Ohio State beat number 18, Wisconsin, 38-7. Number 22, Kansas State beat number 10, Oklahoma, 48-41. Number 1, LSU beat number 11, Auburn, 23-20. And number 14, Michigan beat number 16, Notre Dame, 45-24. Now looking at Week 10, here are the Week 10 matchups to keep an eye on this week in college football. Number 8, Georgia versus number 6, Florida. And number 15, SMU versus number 24, Memphis. So that's the Week 9 final scores and the Week 10 schedule for college football. In the Week 10 college football AP Top 10 poll, the current top 10 college football teams are LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Penn State, Florida, Oregon, Georgia, Utah, and Oklahoma. Right now I'm going to take a commercial break. When I come back, I will talk about the end of the show. Welcome back to All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to end the show. What to watch for this week in sports. The Broncos' next game is against the Browns on Sunday, November 3rd in Denver. The 9th week of NFL regular season football. Colorado goes against UCLA on Saturday, November 2nd. Colorado State goes against UNLV on Saturday, November 2nd up in Fort Collins, Colorado. CU Buffaloes, CSU Rams, the 10th week of college football, the Nuggets, NBA basketball, the Avalanche, NHL hockey. Moving on now, on the next show, I will talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, NHL hockey, and college football. I hope you all have a great weekend. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next Thursday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports through Met Radio, here on mymetmedia.com. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.